Welcome to this episode of Cheerful to Stormy, the everyday podcast with Ollie Schmidt. Today I have a guest again, and regular listeners will already know him. He was with us in episode 10 about sudden retirement, and today, as mentioned, we're talking about dementia. With me is Jürgen Griesbeck. Jürgen was a geriatric nurse for 20 years and in that position worked extensively with people with dementia, caring for and supporting them. He also accompanied his own father in the last years of his life, who was also affected by dementia. And as is Jürgen's way, he shows us how to find something positive in this situation and how the contact with people with dementia or one's own relatives and parents can bring about something good. We discuss what dementia is, how to communicate effectively with people who have dementia, and the unique aspects of communication in these situations. We also naturally talk about the subject of self-care, as it is often a bit neglected by caregivers of people with dementia. And now I'm looking forward to the interview with Jürgen Griesbeck. Hello, dear Jürgen.
Hello, dear Oliver. Greetings.
It's great that you took the time again today for this important topic. Today, we're talking about dementia. We'll take a look at what dementia actually is and then look at the challenges in communicating with people with dementia. And at the very end, we'll also talk about self-care for people who are dealing with dementia patients. So it's definitely worth staying tuned. And as I just mentioned, we'll start with the question, dear Jürgen, what is dementia actually?
Yes, dementia is a condition closely related to the disappearance of short-term memory and eventually normal memory. It is a term that encompasses various diseases that lead to the loss of knowledge and memories, making it increasingly difficult for us to navigate the world spatially and temporally. Eventually, this can even lead to forgetting personal data, such as details about our family or ourselves. This naturally causes a lot of confusion.
And that indeed brings special challenges, especially for people dealing with those who have dementia. And that's why today we want to focus particularly on addressing these challenges, especially the challenges in communication with people who have dementia.
Yes, the thing is, we usually assume that the people we talk to know who we are, where we are, and what topic we're referring to. This is less and less the case with people who have dementia. They may not remember who you are or what the topic was. You might say, "We had an appointment yesterday," or "We plan to go for a walk today." In the beginning, people with dementia try to cover this up. They often bluff and pretend they remember and try to follow the conversation because most people want to remain part of society. They want to be accepted and taken seriously and not treated condescendingly. And as soon as it becomes clear that someone doesn't have all their marbles, as the saying goes, they worry about not being part of society anymore. That's why people with dementia, especially in the early stages, mask these questions like, "How do we know each other?" or "What did we agree on?" They then talk about something else or only about what they can still remember. For the people interacting with them, it is confusing at first because they think the person looks the same, hasn't changed at all. So why are they behaving so strangely? It can't be. They get frustrated and say, "Focus," or "Why are you acting so strange? You should know that I was here yesterday and that we had an appointment at 3 o'clock. And then you didn't show up. I'm worried." So they get upset and try to reason with the person, which doesn't work because it's an irreversible, very serious illness that becomes increasingly severe over time.
Often that is probably still in a phase where there's no diagnosis of dementia yet.
Yes, it's just that many people don't think about how their brain works. They just go through life and think, well, everyone forgets something once in a while, and that can't be so bad. But when it happens more frequently, and they notice they're making mistakes or certain memories are no longer available, there are two groups of people. One group gets to the bottom of it, as you often see in American films about dementia, like the famous film Still Alice. A linguistics professor tries to find out what's going on with her brain, reads a lot about dementia, gets examined, and then receives the diagnosis. But this does not apply to most people in this world. Most people repress it. They think, "I don't want to deal with that, I don't want a diagnosis," and often consciously avoid going to a neurologist, aside from the difficulty of getting an appointment.
And of course, it's also a difficult and very unpleasant topic, as you mentioned. Communication has a lot to do with society and participation. And when something doesn't work, it often leads to the fear of being excluded. Just like you said, Yusand, if I now have someone who is afraid to go to the doctor and fears it, of course, as a relative, I am not a therapist, diagnostician, or doctor, but are there typical changes in language or communication behavior that I can be alert to?
Yeah, so I just want to get back to the diagnosis. It's hard for most people to deal with diagnoses. So it's not just about getting the diagnosis and then dealing with it, but the diagnosis often also means a judgment or a certain assessment that family members need to manage. How can I recognize it? Well, I can recognize it if I have gotten to know the person in my environment better, and then notice that, for example, a person who values beauty and order highly, maybe even a bit perfectionistic, suddenly has stains on their blouse, or doesn't keep appointments and isn't as precise as before. Or I can recognize it by noticing that people who used to be very communicative and love to talk withdraw and don't like to present themselves anymore and become rather monosyllabic. I can recognize it when I speak as I do now, in long sentences, perhaps even with subordinate clauses. And I see that my counterpart feels overwhelmed. Long sentences are no longer understood, and it's better to repeat what you want to say in short sentences.
Probably also compared to before. So if someone was doing well with it before and then suddenly isn't anymore, that's a sign.
Yes, changing interests come into play. For example, some people are very interested in world affairs, read newspapers, or listen to the news, or like to talk about their hobbies, and then suddenly they don't seem interested at all. They withdraw somewhat. And I definitely want to mention that this could also be a sign of depression. That's why diagnosis is important, because people who were interested before and suddenly become so silent and withdrawn may possibly be suffering from depression. And if a neurological assessment determines that it is definitely not a form of dementia, but rather depression, then therapeutic intervention can be successful here. With dementia, there are only medications.
So in that case, the diagnosis is very, very important to find the right therapy. All right, assuming that has happened, there is a diagnosis, and we know it is about dementia, that it is indeed dementia. How can we as relatives adapt our own communication strategies to the needs of people with dementia?
Yes, this is a very important question because dementia patients often feel very misunderstood, and you can try to put yourself in their shoes. Their life is characterized by disorientation, no sense of time, no sense of place, and often a sense of alienation with people they encounter. This causes extreme fear. There's nothing to hold on to. And if you interact with someone suffering from dementia, I strongly advise getting acquainted with the disease in general first to avoid the all too common misunderstanding that these individuals are doing it on purpose. They are not doing it on purpose. It's something that increasingly happens due to the disease, leading to what I would call a falling out of our highly interconnected social reality in which we can find our place over and over again. People with dementia can do this less and less. So my main advice is to learn about dementia and then focus on the 3 crucial communication methods to reach people with dementia successfully. And I'd like to start with the most important one right away. It is by Naomi Fiel and is called validation. Validation means that I initially agree with what the person tells me. I do not contradict them. The secret of validation is that most people seek confirmation in conversations. They want to be right.
That means I validate what the person says. So I confirm it just as you said just now.
I confirm it. And that's sometimes not so easy. So if someone says, oh, what a beautiful Sunday, and yes, today is Monday, you can just let it slide. But it would be silly to say, today is not Sunday, today is Monday. Instead, you just let it go. But if, for example, you come every day at noon to cook for the person so they have a meal and the person says, you never come to me, you constantly let me starve, then validation might not be so simple because you feel attacked and want to defend yourself. Still, it would be good to say, did you miss me? Are you very hungry? So it's better to respond with a distracting question rather than saying, I was here yesterday, what are you talking about? So with validation, you should first really agree, avoid resistance, and not reject what they say. Give the person the feeling that yes, it's okay, then distract and ask other questions.
That means maybe also looking at this statement and addressing the need behind the question or the comment.
Yes, the need. So when, for example, a person with dementia says, "You stole my wallet," which is quite an accusation, you shouldn't respond with, "What would I want with your wallet?" or "I'm not a thief," or things like that. Instead, you should ask, "Oh, the wallet, when did you see it last?" Or "What does it look like?" Or "How much money was in it?" Or say something like, "Without money, nothing works," or something funny to find out that this issue with money is actually a need for security and to ensure that everything is in order. So you shouldn't resist these things, but always try to understand what is really behind them.
Okay, so that was the validation, the first part.
Yes, so I'll summarize again. Validation means not contradicting, but agreeing with the person, and then distracting, being humorous, staying relaxed, and understanding the underlying need of the statement. That would be validation.
Then there's a second area that you mentioned.
Yes. The second area is biographical work. That means we humans live in a world that wasn't made for us, and we have to find our place in it. This place could be a job, a family, or a specific identity where we say, "Yes, this is mine." And this place is then combined with certain knowledge and skills. And often this world is also combined with long-term memories. I can give an example. My father was a bricklayer, and in his old age, he developed dementia. I could have wonderful conversations with my father about construction sites. He worked a lot in bridge construction and often had breaks with various colleagues. And even though he had been retired for a long time, I talked to him as if he'd just come from the construction site or had to go back there tomorrow. He felt so comfortable and would tell me stories. I could create really pleasant moments for him through my questions. And because I combined it with validation, I didn't tell him he had been retired for a long time. Instead, I acknowledged his hard work and contributions one-on-one. It was very endearing, and I can only recommend it. So, for example, if someone does a lot of housework, you could talk about cooking, laundry, or children, or the garden. What people are good at. With you, Oliver, I would always talk about podcasts, how to use headphones correctly, and such things.
Yes, I would certainly enjoy that. Then we would have a good level of conversation. This means immersing myself in the constructed reality of my counterpart, the dementia patient, and speaking with them in a way that acknowledges their reality as the given reality for this communication.
Yes, and you can also do that, for example, when you are at someone's house by asking, "Where did you get this beautiful table?" Or "How long have you been living here?" Or "Where are these shoes from?" that you might find in a cupboard, maybe old shoes, or "What kind of typewriter is this?" So with these objects, you can keep bringing up these points and make the biography come to life. A sewing machine or certain kitchen appliances can also help build a bridge to the main activity.
Okay, so biographical work means engaging with the life reality or constructed reality of the other person and working with that. That's the second area.
And maybe this will also help to better understand certain statements from the person with dementia. So if someone always says, "Yes, now I need to go out to the animals are waiting for me," and you might be sitting in an old apartment in Munich wondering what animals they're talking about, you can assume that the person lived on a farm for a long time, probably as a young person, and is now recalling that it's time to milk. So you can better understand their statements and grasp them better. This is why biographical work is a very good way to connect better with the person and not to feel so clueless about what they're saying.
Lovely, lovely idea. And you can imagine it well. If you immerse yourself in what the other person is saying and go along with it, you'll naturally have a much better level of conversation. That's the case in any normal conversation as well.
Absolutely. And the last one is actually the nicest. It really is the nicest. And this method always works with everyone. This method has a peculiar name, but it is very easy to explain. It is called basal stimulation, which means we use our 5 senses. We can see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. Even if someone suffers severely from dementia, they can still be reached through their sensory channels. Even if they can no longer think, well, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. This doesn't really apply to people with dementia anymore. But I can smell an apple pie, or I can remember the soundtrack of my life. Everyone has certain songs in their mind that they associate with something. For example, I have Nicht aus Liebe weinen or Simon, lass das träumen. These are songs from earlier years, but it could also be Bob Dylan or anything else. The idea is to evoke something in the person that left a strong impression. For my father, it was the bridge on the River Kwai.
We know that from a different context, but okay, it's interesting.
Well, that completely fascinated him. Or he loved watching certain movies. He could watch the chariot race in Ben-Hur over and over. It was his favorite. He could watch it 10 times, and we always had wonderful moments. It was really nice to reconnect over things like that. So basal stimulation means finding out which sensory stimulus can delight this person. Looking at photos, examining clothes, you can eat, smell, taste certain things, or of course, touch things. So it is a very good way to give a person with dementia beautiful moments.
Okay, so the basal stimulation, the third tip in this context when dealing with people with dementia. We've heard it many times now, immersing oneself in the other's world and acknowledging it as reality. This means that things like respect, patience, and empathy play a significant role in communication with people with dementia.
You summarized that very well. That's very important, and it requires a lot of love and patience from us as their counterpart. And we don't always have it. That's clear. We don't always have it. I sometimes think that people aren't naturally capable of love because they are so stressed or have so many other things on their minds. And that's why you really have to let go of certain preconceptions and really immerse yourself with a positive attitude so that it works out. And maybe also with curiosity and a quiet determination to somehow manage to reach someone and make them smile, or to simply have a nice time together without it being as exhausting as usual, where it might feel tedious and you think nothing is possible anymore. A person with dementia experiences quite a change in their character, but they are still there and reachable. And that can also make you satisfied or a bit happy.
How is it in, well, that's now the very close circle, the very important people, but in a somewhat broader circle, friends, relatives who may not always deal with it? How can I bring it closer to them?
Even these people can be very successful in communication, provided they really take their time and have the ease that is necessary for it. Because some people with dementia are naturally very suspicious and maybe a bit irritable, or they are very reserved. So it's not like you show up and they start talking like in your podcast and just say something. You always have to be prepared for anything. This means you have to take good care of yourself first so that you are in good shape. Meaning that you've slept well, you're not hungry, don't have a follow-up appointment right away, and aren't expecting things to go a certain way. You need to be open and relaxed, and you have to ensure that yourself. This is very important. And the people who deal a lot with dementia always have to take breaks and take good care of themselves. And if they don't know the person well, as you mentioned, maybe their neighbors or people coming in from outside, then they might build a bridge by looking around the apartment for any objects that can help. So, who is that in the photo? Or how long have you lived here? Then they either say something true or they tell a story. For instance, I once met an elderly lady and she asked me where her husband was. I asked what her husband looked like and she replied, "He looks like you, but younger." Because it then became clear to me that she thinks she's still 20, significantly younger. And then I went along with it and chatted with her about her husband. And that was a really nice conversation, but her husband didn't show up, which was expected. So she put up with me instead. You always need a bit of lightness, humor, and the willingness to engage in a role play to make it work well, especially when you don't know the person very well. I might also mention here that almost all people with dementia have lucid moments. They have lucid moments. And if you are a bit familiar with their biorhythm and can estimate when they might be more reachable, then you can use these lucid moments to gather some communication material for the less lucid times, which you can then use to converse with the person differently.
Yes, how can one make use of these bright moments?
Yes, that you talk to them about how they are doing right now and how they perceive themselves. So in these lucid moments, they can be reflective. That's the special thing, that you can then also talk to them about how they feel today, how they are doing, and what they are thinking right now and in the future. And when this clarity fades over the course of the day, you can use that as a starting point to craft a conversation. It really is like material for a conversation.
Yeah, okay, interesting. We've talked a lot about verbal communication, and we know that it's only the tip of the iceberg, and that a huge part of communication happens non-verbally. So it's not just about the spoken word, but also what we express through facial expressions, gestures, tone, pitch, speech speed, and so on. What role does that play in dealing with people with dementia?
So you're touching on something very important here. One aspect is body language and the other is art. Let me start with body language. It's about looking kindly. I think that's always useful, just like other forms of communication. It helps to remain a friendly person. It's about genuinely looking at someone kindly, paying attention to your facial expressions, keeping the corners of your mouth up, and developing a posture that radiates friendliness and builds trust. These small gestures can have a significant impact. Especially when people are very scared, they wonder if their distrust is warranted or if the person is open to them. The second part is about art in the broadest sense, distracting people with activities you can do with your hands. You can bring some pens, draw, or do something with yarn. If someone has worked a lot in the office, they can stamp and punch holes in paper. You can bring plasticine and make figures. You can also make noises with porcelain, pots, and forks. You can get creative. Some will immediately go along with it. The more it relates to their life story, the better. You can fold laundry or cut soup greens. These are wonderful ways to make contact. It becomes a genuinely enjoyable experience.
And in the end, this leads to, as I understand it, dementia patients feeling understood, heard, and recognized.
Absolutely. And I want to emphasize that in this process and in the talking, it doesn't need to make sense. It doesn't need to yield a real outcome. It's all about the process. It's about always engaging in the activity of building bridges, continuously creating connections to another's heart. There's a beautiful book called The Heart Does Not Become Demented. This means we always yearn for love and are always open to love. When it flows. And when we feel bridges instead of walls. Yes, and that's the wonderful thing. You can actually create this without all those justifications. It doesn't have to be useful. It doesn't need to have an impressive outcome. Not at all.
And it's not that easy in our society to engage in something that is completely pointless or remains completely without results.
Yes, you're right, because we always have to be efficient somehow, and we always have to make a good impression, and we already understand it, and we are ahead of the curve. This is a completely new way of being in the world. And I think if you do this for a while and then practice it outside of communication with people with dementia, it becomes clear that this form of communication also enriches you. It makes you more confident. And you start to think that all these meaningfulness and usefulness, all this importance that people constantly celebrate, can also be very easily questioned in the long run.
Absolutely. We often do many things with a purpose, like do this to achieve that or to get there. But just doing something for its own sake can also be a nice exercise, even for someone without dementia.
Yes, it can do everyone good. You're absolutely right. So in order to is usually about daily events for cognitively healthy people. They can also relieve themselves that way.
Exactly. And we've already heard it, and I also remember a story myself, which is also related to the topic of dementia, which happens in different stages. And I remember when my grandmother first began to show signs of dementia, she used to repeatedly tell a specific episode from her school days. It was something that had obviously affected her deeply. She had been accused of something she didn't do. It was actually her neighbor. And she kept telling this story over and over again. until it became a sort of repeated loop. Yes, stories and memories from the past become increasingly important.
Yes, that's true. And it can be like a prison. Yes, it can be like a prison. On one hand, it's a bit of a step up into your own biography because it actually reminds you of something that once stirred strong feelings. It's often the case that the things which made us feel a lot, positively or negatively, are stored in our long-term memory. But they can also pin us down and not let us go. In such cases, I would always respond with validation. Paraphrasing, repeating, confirming, and then distracting.
Paraphrased, we need to briefly explain, does it mean to convey in one's own words?
Yes, put it in your own words. So when she keeps telling the story she experienced at school, you say, yes, I understand. At school, she was very cheeky to you, and then she also knocked over the inkwell. Yes, I understand. Look, let's go over to the other room. I think we can see something particularly beautiful if we look out the window because the sun is setting right now. Then you take her by the hand and point out the sunset or the tree or whatever is there. This way, you can free the person a bit from their story and make something else possible. Distracting them is a very good technique. I also think it's good when people keep telling the same stories to start moving. As far as possible, of course. Sometimes people are in wheelchairs or walkers. But really, getting moving is good. Many facilities for people with dementia are designed so that you can walk in a circle without doors, allowing you to escape yourself a bit through movement and also reduce adrenaline. That's quite good and can certainly be used, perhaps to even facilitate communication.
Now we are already discussing approaches and methods for working with people with dementia. And I have already mentioned that dementia is a progressive process, a continuing degeneration or decline of the brain. Are there any other special approaches and methods? You just mentioned walking in circles. For people with advanced dementia, to reach them?
For people with advanced dementia, the best approach is usually basal stimulation. I also think it's always good to incorporate art and hands-on activities, bringing along specific materials to work with. Something to write on, for example. These could also be building kits. Everything must, of course, be very suitable for gross motor skills. There are specific dementia toys you can order online or buy in stores where you can screw, cut, or staple things. These activities can be done in the present moment. People with advanced dementia are deeply rooted in their own reality and are harder to reach, but I wouldn't give up. I would always try basal stimulation using things that smell good, certain light effects, or especially music, which can incredibly reach people. Prayers, poems, specific names, things that played a role in their biography can help make a connection and bring them back to the present.
So keep at it and always expect that there will be good and bad days or good and bad moments in a day, and keep trying. This really requires a lot of strength and energy, even from family members. And it was hinted at a bit earlier that it's also important to take care of yourself when dealing with and communicating with people with dementia. Maybe to wrap up our conversation, you have a few thoughts and tips on what people who interact with dementia patients can do for themselves as well.
So what helps both is structure. Dementia patients live in a timeless continuum. They don't know when things start and end. Therefore, it's quite beneficial when there are regularities they can recognize as having structure. It's a bit like in a hospital. Breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, and another day is done. So structure is good for people with dementia, and it's also good for those who care for them because they always know what the next step is. And now we're back to the topic of self-care, where it's absolutely essential to also include breaks for the person providing care. That's why it's good if dementia care is shared among several shoulders, so someone can always step away. I worked in elder care for 20 years, and I managed it because I went swimming for an hour every day. Yes, I rejuvenated in the water with this elemental change, diving under and reconnecting with myself, and I breathed in a particular way through swimming. So I would really encourage people who are relatives or involved in dementia care to do something involving movement to vent, maybe get a bit of dopamine, some serotonin, and reduce adrenaline. Then it's about doing something good for yourself because people with dementia aren't necessarily champions of appreciation. You contribute a lot, but you can't always expect them to be very grateful or to understand what you demand of yourself continually. Therefore, you have to take care of yourself by maintaining contacts outside, doing something good for yourself, allowing yourself a walk, treating yourself to pistachio ice cream, and experiencing what you go through as a very special encounter. I can talk again about my relationship with my father. We had a very difficult time living together when I was young. He didn't agree with me at all, and there were many conflicts. When he became demented, I was allowed to shave him. He would stroke my cheek and repeatedly tell me that he was glad I was there. In hindsight, I am so grateful that I was able to experience that time with him, because now I have a totally different sense of closure with him compared to when he was still of sound mind. It was a very special experience. It is also very touching that in self-care, one reflects positively on such things, appreciating that even if the person you once knew is no longer there but is now someone else, you may be dealing with the ageless core of that person and can share new experiences and memories. Especially when someone is no longer around, it is so important to remember the good moments you had together. Remembering something beautiful you shared fills you with warmth. Therefore, self-care includes taking breaks, staying active, and perceiving the whole experience as enriching and special, and not always just tiring. See it as an invitation to learn rather than a burden. Dementia communication is needed all over the world. Everyone is happy when they are affirmed, and basal stimulation affects everyone. Another point is making oneself more independent and sovereign from the reactions of others. Becoming a queen or king, so to speak, and saying, yes, I have made this decision, I have my reasons, I know my intention in engaging with this person, and it is my choice. I won't let it bring me down, but will take it as a personal challenge.
Very nice. That means in the end something a bit positive after all, and you take away some of the fear of the timeless essence. I found that very nice. I wrote it down. So what actually makes a person who they are, independent of their age?
So people say that personality is 40%. I don't even know where the number comes from, but I've read it in several studies. 40% innate. And this ageless core of our being, it's just there. And it has to keep coping with the different roles offered by the world, but it remains. You can always recognize someone by their laughter, looks, certain movements, or even a certain way they interact with the world. And that just stays. And even if the mind is not as diverse as that of a healthy person, you can actually meet each other and engage in exchanges through that.
Dear Jürgen, thank you very much. Those were many exciting insights and many interesting things you shared with us. I learned a lot. I always do this too, to learn something new myself.
Very good.
I have that today. I would have liked to know much of it a few years ago, but it will certainly help me in my life once or twice. I hope it also helped the listeners and brought them something valuable. As always, we welcome feedback at podcast@familienservice.de. And I want to say a heartfelt thank you to you, dear Jürgen.
And I also want to sincerely thank you for your interest, Oliver. And I wish everyone who interacts with people suffering from dementia much strength and a lot of humor. I wish this for them from the bottom of my heart, and hope that they can see it as an invitation to perceive themselves differently. We always have to perform in certain roles, and people with dementia see us differently. That can also be very liberating. It is always an opportunity to grow. All the best.
I couldn't have put it better myself. Bye.